We're live, everybody. How's it going? Happy Friday. I'm
It
glad it's
is
Friday.
Friday. That's right. Oh yeah, of course it's Friday because it's our show.
That's right. I know. It's great.
We
Happy
tell
Friday.
time during the pandemic by our show. Yeah.
Well, I know. Sometimes it feels like, what day is it? What year? What month? But we are happy that it's Friday because we get to chat and talk a little bit about some of the things that are maybe pain points for you as worship leaders, as sound techs, as people who are dealing with worship and technology. And so for those of you who are new, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Andrea Olson, and I started an organization called Overflow Worship about 7 years ago and just have a passion for the church and for resourcing the church. And Ben and I met a few years back through the ministry of Overflow. And so, Ben, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself? You can do it better than I can.
Well, Andrea has this great conference and really community, as she described, the Overflow worship community, and she had asked me to come and present year one, and I just fell in love with her commitment to educating worship musicians and AV techs, and I'm just grateful that she's kept me around all these years to continue that mission.
Well, it's been fun. We're grateful for you and just your heart for the church as well. So thank you for for that and for joining us on this crazy fun journey. So, we have been addressing questions. So, for those of you who are new tuning in, if you have questions regarding worship technology or just, maybe worship ministry in general, because that's kind of what we did last week, was
Yep.
talking about volunteer recruitment. But if you have questions, throw them in the chat or send us a message or a post. And if you're tuning in on YouTube, we do have a Facebook group devoted to this conversation. So you can join the Worship Technology Discussion Facebook group as well if you want to kind of get in on the more specifics of the discussion. But today we're talking about room tuning the room. And this is Ben's expertise. It is not mine. The extent of, well, this isn't even really tuning the room. I just had some training on like frequency and understanding the differences between frequency. I took a class back in like, I don't know, 2007, 2008 that was, you know, just critical listening. And so that's helped me in my like process with recording and that kind of thing, but we're in a whole different realm here with live sound and tuning the room, which is a big question that you probably get and I get. And so then when I get it, I say, you should call Ben because I don't know. So why don't you kick us off, Ben, with maybe just some general um, ideas surrounding tuning the room. Maybe you can define it and demystify it a little bit as we kick off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of rabbit holes here, and this can get really nerdy fast, which is why we've got you as a great referee to blow the whistle and say, "Whoa, timeout." Uh, but I think when you say tuning the room, my first thought based on that verbiage is that we are fixing the room itself. And of course, there's two ways that we can go about adjusting the way our system sounds in a room. Uh, one is um, one is that we fix the room, and two is that we adjust the system, and they really work kind of hand in glove, so to speak.
Okay.
And I'd see Howie says, "How can you tune a room if you can't tune a fish?" Uh, now, sidebar, I have to humble myself, and what better place to be humble than a Christian webcast? But
Yeah.
uh, I lost a wrestling match to Howie at a trade show, so I've been training for the rematch. So I think he's just here to kind of goad me on. But you know what, Howie Darkstar, it's coming, brother.
He's
I'm
coming.
yeah.
He's taunting you.
By the way, Howie is one of the most wonderful nerds you'll ever meet. He's one of my geek nerd brothers, super smart guy. Really great to have him on the webcast. And thanks everybody else for watching. And by the way, this question did come from a viewer. So keep your
Yes.
questions coming, like Andrea said, and we'll answer them. So, two things that I would say here, and I think we'll talk more about system tuning today as opposed to room tuning. Room tuning, uh, is something that you would do to treat the acoustic properties of a room to make it more desirable. And there is not necessarily a right answer. If we look at some of the old acoustic designs for cathedrals and things that had very, very long decay rates, long reverb times, and that's what they wanted for the content of the time. Now, in contemporary worship and contemporary music, Certainly, as a vocalist, you want some natural ambience and reverb, but we want a much shorter RT time with electrified sound and that sort of thing. So,
Okay.
uh,
So, for somebody who is new to this verbiage in this conversation, so for your purposes, room treatment and room tuning are pretty much the same thing, right? Like, kind of
I
for
was,
this
yeah,
purpose. Okay. And
yep,
so then system tuning would be tuning your system to the room, right? Like
that's exactly right.
okay. Okay. So this is good. Clarifying questions is helping me too. So we know the definitions as we go forward.
So normally I wouldn't be talking to AV techs about room tuning or system tuning, uh, simply because it's not an area they typically would be working in
Right.
unless you're installing a system. And that's something that usually, for example, us as a contractor would do. We would
Mhm.
we would tune the room and then tune the system to the room, and then more or less lock you out of it and say, "Don't touch this,"
Sure.
because if the room doesn't change, the system doesn't need to change. You
True.
know, and you can get into some problems there. But I think
Hmm.
it's a really relevant topic right now because we're not in our traditional worship
Yep.
spaces in a lot of cases. We're moving our worship to parking lots, outside of malls, even outside of churches. But having to adapt due to the pandemic, some places are not able to worship inside their traditional space. So in that case, I think system tuning is relevant because we're setting up the system every time,
Yeah.
and those circumstances could change.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think we'll kind of set aside room tuning and tuning a system in that environment, maybe for a kind of another day, sort of
Yeah.
a probably best to get the pros involved in that case. And certainly feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. We can help with acoustic design recommendations and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But today I want to get really nerdy and just so excited.
Yes. Go, Ben, go.
So I think one of the first things to talk about here, it's a good segue from what we just talked about to the don't touch it, in that the first thing you should do is tune your system. Because if I start EQing drums and EQing vocals and I start getting my mix set up and then I tune my system, everything I did is wrong. I'll have
Yeah.
to undo everything. The
Okay.
system tuning is global.
Yep.
We're not tuning necessarily for for character, although to some degree a little bit. But really, what we're tuning for is accuracy, so
Hmm.
that what we put through the system is what people hear. Um, and I think this is a great time to kick off with a graphic. And let me see if I can do that here. I'm all nervous because Howie's watching. So he's such a
Oh,
smart
no.
guy. Yeah. But he says he loves me and he loves the Lord. You should love Andrea too. She's actually a much nicer person than me, always. So, but I think she would have won that wrestling match. So, let me pop over here real quick, and what you should see here is kind of a GIF courtesy of my friends at Rational Acoustics, which make a program called Smart. It's an acoustic measurement software. And what we're seeing in the top is a spectral response of the sound on an RTA, a real-time analyzer. And to explain this really quick, from left to right, we're seeing low frequency to high frequency. And then the vertical scale is amplitude, which is a nerd word for loud.
Hmm.
So if I was passing pink noise, which is equal energy across the octaves, it should be pretty much a flat line.
Okay.
Um, and that's what they say when you talk about a system being flat. That's what they mean. It's kind of a flat line if I was to do this.
Hmm.
Now, what we see here is these lines are moving. It doesn't have any averaging applied. Um, and I'm not going to get real too far into the weeds, but basically, if we saw something that was really sticking up or really poking down, we might, and I'll say might because there's a big gotcha coming, we might adjust our EQ to boost or reduce that frequency a little bit. Right down below in the green and orange highlights there, we see a waterfall spectrum trace that's kind of showing us that over history. So it's continuing to draw that image so we can see historically, which, by the way, different show, but that is a great way to identify feedback because it will just show up as a stripe.
Sure.
If you don't know, what is 1.3, kilohertz,
Hmm.
if you can't identify that by ear, which, as you said, you took a class and that is something we should all aspire to, is to kind of learn where those things are. But it takes some time and it takes some
Mm-hmm.
training.
Yeah.
Uh, and if you don't know, the software will just tell you. You look for where the stripe is, you drag your mouse over it, and it'll say, "Oh, that's 1.3K." Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because I mean, it was valuable training for me in my field, but I felt like it should have been something that came easily just because I'm a musician and but it was not. It's like a whole nother language. And so to have software to help with that's incredible. I love that.
Yeah, some of the things that musicians and technicians say, correlate really closely. Like, you say A440, I say 440 hertz.
Hmm.
Some not so much. Like you say middle C, I say 262.
Yeah.
So but it's the same thing, and that's a really great place to start. Is to
Hmm.
understand that sound, music, travels in waves.
Hmm.
And I actually have a couple of screens for this, which time to jump in the deep end of the pool here, kids.
All right, let's do it.
Yes, it's here comes the pain. Uh, let's see. Let's do this one. And I'm going to actually move to a different screen here. There we go. So we're going to come back to the graphic that popped up a second ago. But what's important to note is that while sound travels in waves, the frequency determines the wavelength. So lower frequencies, as we can see here, 20 hertz, very low,
Hmm.
at the bottom end of what our subwoofers might produce. 100 hertz at the top end of what our subwoofers might produce. Those waves range between 56.5 feet and 11.3 feet. Uh, and the math is actually kind of easy if you want to know it. We're sort of averaging the speed of sound here at 1130 feet per second. So that's how you can see we take 100 hertz into that. We get the 11.3. All right, lost everybody. Moving on. So,
Eyes glazed. No, I'm just
yeah.
kidding.
Thank goodness it's only a 20-minute show. Usually in my presentations, people are popping aspirin by now. But
Oh
no,
no,
it's
no,
not.
that's not true. It's
It's
just
not that bad.
no, no, it's not, Ben.
Actually, one of the fun things that I like to hear, I have a lot of fun with this, and I try to crack a lot of jokes, and my jokes are kind of cheesy and corny, but I want to keep it lighthearted and fun for people because I
Yeah.
understand that you don't necessarily want to you know do a lot of math. You just want to mix good sound, but the two kind of
Mhm.
go hand in hand. So
Yeah.
I think one of the best reviews I ever got after a conference was somebody said, "I never thought I would laugh so much at a technology presentation." So here's to that.
You're like, "Great. I think that was a compliment."
Absolutely, I think it
No, I'm
was. Yeah,
kidding. Yeah.
I think it absolutely was. I don't know if they learned anything, but yeah. Um, but anyway, I guess the moral of the story here is that what we need to understand is that what exists at one frequency will be different at another frequency. So potentially, if we fix one problem, we could create another. So there's going to be
Sure.
some balance here. We're kind of looking for the average,
Okay.
just looking to sort of solve things as best we can. And we're not ever going to get a perfectly flat line,
Mhm.
and that's okay. We're just looking to sort of, as the name implies, equalize things, kind of
Yeah.
bring things together. And the reason I started talking about wavelength is that EQ may not be uh, the only thing we do to fix our issues,
Yeah.
and it may not fix them at all. Um, Speaker placement is a really big deal.
Yeah.
We have to align things, and there are situations where we can see dips on a spectrum analyzer, like we looked at a minute ago, and we can't fix it with EQ
Hmm.
because it's a product of cancellation
Yep.
between some of the speakers we have or things that are bouncing off the wall, and room moding, and those things get really kind of frustrated and complicated. So I'm sort of trying to gloss past them a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's look at it this way. Uh, Basically, here's a quick way to understand what happens if we have two waves of identical frequency and identical amplitude, and they arrive exactly at the same time. You'll have complete addition, so that wave is going to get bigger. But we can see if we look at the 90, 120, and 180, excuse me, skip 180, the 90, 20, 120, and 240, we can begin to have what's called a phase shift.
Hmm.
We start to shift things, and we can have partial amplitude change. Uh, and those can manifest themselves as kind of things that sound weird.
Hmm.
So time aligning a system is really important. And here's the other thing, and this really befuddles people, is the opposite of the 0 degree is 180 degrees. And this is exactly how noise canceling headphones work, by the way.
Hmm.
If we can match that frequency at exactly 180-degree, phase. In essence, we invert it. It will cancel itself out, and you'll have no sound.
Hmm.
So, moral of the story: if you've ever walked around a room, and bass is the easiest thing to do this with. If you've ever walked around a room and you hear a lot of bass here, and you step 3 feet to the right and you hear no bass there,
Yep.
that's a product of summation and cancellation,
Hmm.
and it's not a product of EQ, but time, which is a sort of phase is a fancy word for time.
Sure. And so
So
that would mean then it's probably a placement issue first
exactly.
and then EQ. Okay.
Yep, you're not going to fix it with the EQ. You need to fix it with either by moving the speakers physically, or moving the speakers in time.
Hmm.
In fact, one of our viewers, Gerald, who's a friend of mine, and his church down in Oklahoma, we worked on an install together down there. And when we just hung the boxes where they needed to be, you sort of have different considerations: aesthetic, how it looks, and structural. It has to be safe to hang it there.
Hmm.
And acoustic usually gets put third or fourth place on the list of considerations. So we kind of have to deal with,
Yeah.
the other, acoustic things. So,
Yeah.
um, oh, we got it's a couple comments here. A couple guys. Well, thanks so much for watching, guys. Stevie, Eugene.
Cool.
By the way, if
Happy with
you're
you.
watching from Facebook, you have to do a thing so that your name will show up. Otherwise, it will just show up as Facebook user. So, hey guys, whoever you are, hello.
Yeah. Cool. That's awesome. So with regards to what you were just talking about, I was thinking
Mhm.
about the churches that I worked with. Oftentimes, when they're coming to me and saying, "Hey, do you know an installer or a professional who could help us with our sound issues?" And usually that's a blanket term that it's just sound issues. Like it's just we don't know. And what I'm really hearing them say after some kind of conversation and trying to navigate and figure out what's going on is that they don't even know what questions to ask. And so they feel intimidated by even calling somebody because it's like, hello, hi, I'm not really even sure what we need, but we need someone to come into our sanctuary
Yeah, please
because
come
there's
in and lay hands on our mixing board or whatever it is you do to
I
fix it.
mean,
Yeah. So
literally, we have done that because Sunday morning, it's like, I don't even know. Jesus, intervene.
it
Because,
can't hurt. It can't hurt.
I mean, he is just faithful in all things. So, um,
Jesus, take the mute button.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, and sometimes, you know what? Just a really quick side note. For those of you who are listening, and you know how we get really stressed out about technology issues and sound issues, and because realistically the sound system goes or the soundboard dies I mean, okay, all the keyboards are electronic, all the guitars are electric, all these things, I mean, we're silent, right? So there was a time, it was 14 years ago, where I was leading worship, and it was in our small local church, and it was the week of Thanksgiving, actually. And the only reason I remember that is because we were going to have a community Thanksgiving meal that day after church. And midway through, this power went out.
Mm.
And so I'm leading from an electric keyboard, like a Korg or whatever. So I'm gone. Mike's gone. Everything's gone except the drums, right? And so, I look at our youth drummer and I'm just like, just keep playing. And
Drum solo.
my husband, for some reason, had his acoustic guitar on stage. He always plays bass, but he had his acoustic guitar. So he yanks it off the guitar stand and just starts, strumming as hard as he can. And we had more people after that service tell us that that was the most like powerful, sweet, intimate worship. And so I just want to encourage people as a side note to give yourself grace. Like all of these things are so good and so needed to tune our systems and pay attention to these things. But then also we kind of have to go along with the flow of just real life. And sometimes things happen and maybe the Lord wants to use it. So that's just a little side story.
No, I think it's a great story because I think it leads to maybe even a little bit what you and I talked about on your podcast, where I think if your technology at your church is stressing you out, on one hand, it's not a bad thing because it shows that you care
Mm-hmm.
about the result.
Yep.
But I think too, though, it could be a bad thing. I mean, we certainly don't want to just say, well, that's what it is, and we can't make it any better.
Right.
I think we want to care,
Yes.
but at the same time, we don't want it to drag us down. We don't want that experience to be a bad one that every Sunday you just dread going to church because what fire am I going to put out today? I
Yep.
think, you know, you have to understand that even on the pro side, we address challenges. We just try to do them in such a way that the audience never knows.
Yeah.
Um, so I think to kind of go back, to the project that Gerald and I are working on,
Yeah.
we had bass in exactly the wrong places.
Hmm.
And without moving a box at all, simply changing the delay time on the board for some of the boxes, we steered that, and it just was the greatest thing. I think he enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah.
That's absolutely reality. That's physics. So once we fix the time arrival, uh, and I could talk about a couple of quick, easy tricks to do that with time aligning subs to tops and things. But basically, if you're stacking things together, that's good. Don't stack too many tops too close together because those high frequencies will overlap, and you'll hear that'll manifest itself in more of like a swishing sound or a phasing sound.
Hmm.
A good way to hear that is if you walk left to right between some of your top speakers, you'll kind of hear that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what that is. That's the phasing of the high frequency boxes.
Okay.
Um, but once you've got your time aligning kind of addressed, then we can talk about EQ,
Yeah.
which would compensate for maybe how a system sounds in a room, or maybe how a system sounds outdoors. We might have more high frequency air loss, that sort of thing. Whatever it is, you can now
Yeah.
address that with EQ. So another quick screen share here. I'm still learning how to use this software we use to stream, by the way. So I'm an audio guy, not a video guy.
Doing great.
Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate your vote of confidence. So here we see that spectrum analyzer, that waterfall that we saw before, but I've overlaid a graphic of a 31 band EQ.
Okay.
And so here we can see, the various frequency notches for an EQ. And there are different types of EQ, which maybe we can jump into in a future show, parametric, shelving, that sort of thing. But this is a graphic EQ. Pretty much everybody's seen one of these. And if you haven't, well, today's a big day for all of us. So, uh, and what I've got illustrated here, I mentioned feedback earlier showing up as a stripe. That's exactly what we have here.
Hmm.
So the intention I made this graphic for originally was to demonstrate feedback elimination. But in this case, we might just go into, in this case, it's exactly right on 1K, which I did to make it easy to teach.
Yeah.
We might just go in and drag that down just a little bit, and that feedback will go away and our stripe will go away.
Hmm.
But here we could address some peaks. Maybe something's a little bit harsh. 2K, 2.5K tend to be really sensitive areas for the human ear.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I sort of round that out when I teach audio and say win the threes, which is 300 hertz and 3K.
Okay.
And of course, you as a musician know very, very well, but 300 was where, and really 250, 300 is really, where a lot of the mud lives and a lot of the things that will cause a sound to not be clear. And it's also, there's a lot of energy from instruments there. So things can start to really build up on you.
Yeah.
And same thing at 2 to 3K. That's a very sensitive part of the human ear, so that's where things can sound kind of biting and harsh. So if you can win the threes, your mix is going to sound better really right out of the gate.
Hmm.
And if your system is piercing or muddy, then you're going to fight that on every channel, which is kind of a really good time to just sort of drop this little nugget in. If you find yourself going to every input and knocking out 300,
Hmm.
you should just do it in the system.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
do it once and be done with it.
Yeah. Huh. That's
So just a quick
interesting.
thought on that.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is it. Those types of visuals are so helpful because it it just it shows how we can use this technology to really help us pinpoint those pain points. And I think going back to what I was saying before I got off on that side tangent about the power going out was that asking the right questions is the first step to clarity. And so for you guys who are listening out there, it's probably first a question of, like Ben is saying, your placement of your speakers. And Ben, is there a tool that somebody could use, like a handheld tool or something as they're walking through the room to test for some of those like phase canceling or those kinds of things before they would call in a professional so they could say, hey, this is what I learned, and kind of help
Mhm.
the conversation get started from there?
Absolutely. And this is a really another good future topic to take a deep dive in. But there are RTA apps you can get for smartphones.
Okay.
Now, I'll say this. Oh, hey, Lance, birthday boy, Lance Gray in the house here.
Aw.
So, hey, I will say that I I am not anti-Android, but I'm about to take a shot at Android apps here. And the reason is simply because the hardware has so much variation that the apps can be wildly inaccurate.
Okay.
And Apple's sort of obsessive control over their hardware makes it a lot easier to calibrate and make their audio apps more accurate.
Okay.
So basically, that is to say that typically the iOS apps tend to be more accurate than the
Okay.
Android apps.
Okay. And
Not a
RTA stands for.
Good question. Thank you, Andy. It stands for real time analyzer. So that's what we saw. So here, for example, I've got one on my phone. Anybody
Perfect.
surprised? Probably not. Okay.
No.
Let me fire it up real quick. The other thing I want to point out, and I'm gonna, I'm gonna do this first with sort of the freebie. Uh,
Cool.
Go 1/3 of an octave. There we go. So there's a very. This is. I think this app is maybe $20.
Okay.
We'll talk about free apps in a second, but here you can see what you get for $20.
Yeah.
It's 1/3 of an octave, so it's certainly better than nothing.
Yeah.
You can also buy upgrades, which I don't see the value in this
Okay.
for maybe somebody who's just trying to get a quick look,
Yeah.
because now you're going to spend $50, but
Sure.
you can get things like spectrum analysis.
Cool.
I can change here to here we're now at 1/48 of an octave, so you can see it's much higher resolution.
Yeah. Cool.
We can load calibration files, and like I said, this could almost make a future show because the rabbit hole's really deep.
Yeah, for sure. But it's helpful to know that we have those types of tools because prior, even a decade ago, we didn't have that. And so you'd
Oh,
buy the handheld, RTA and then, walk around the
yeah, for
room and like,
$600.
yeah, and it's like I don't even know like okay. I don't even know how to exactly read this thing. So it's incredible what technology has provided for us at our
Oh, no
fingertips.
doubt. And I
And
think
then
it's worth everybody having this. I'm sorry, I
oh,
interrupted you. I just wanted
yeah.
to say that even if you think you're only going to use it once, I think it's good to have while you
Yeah.
mix. It's
Yeah,
it's good to
true.
have validation of what we hear. And that's been a
Yeah.
hard thing to come to terms with for me is I've been doing this almost 30 years. My ears are not what they used to be.
Yeah. And it's nice to have like that little assistant who's just,
Yes.
yep, like you said, validation.
It
Well,
doesn't lie. It's calibrated. It doesn't have any biases. It doesn't have
yes.
hearing loss. It doesn't lie. So it's good validation.
Yeah. It
The
doesn't
thing
care
I
if it
want
hurts
to
your
say
feelings.
No, yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't care. The thing I
Yeah.
want to say real quick about the apps is remember if the app is free, it's not the product, you are. So
Mm,
I'm always skeptical of free apps.
yeah.
There could be risk of malware or virus or something. And maybe they just want you to buy the paid app and it's just a gateway. So maybe it's not a bad thing. But I
Hmm.
always have a degree of skepticism. One, about how good is it, and two, what are you getting in exchange for giving me this free app?
Yes.
Um, Oh, Lance has a great question here. Are the phone apps limited to the quality of the phone mics? Absolutely,
Okay. Great
absolutely.
question.
And that's why, and the mics in phones today are not really that bad.
Yeah.
Surprisingly accurate. Certainly not as good as $1,000 RTA mic, but you don't need that. This is just to
Right.
kind of get us in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Close counts. But that's why the iOS apps tend to be a lot more accurate is they can calibrate for consistent microphones, whereas different models of Android phones made by different manufacturers have different hardware, not just mics, but different circuitry behind the mic. And that can cause I mean, I've seen some of these apps be so wrong they were
Hmm.
utterly useless,
Yeah.
comically useless.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's so helpful and it's a great place to put a cap on the discussion, but we can
Yes.
always continue it, as we move forward because like you said, it's so deep. It's not like now in 30 minutes you learned how to do everything you possibly could need to know on
You're
this
an audio
topic.
engineer. Congratulations.
Yeah, congrats. So I think it's great, but for you guys who are watching and people who come back and watch later, maybe hopefully this gives you some idea of some valuable questions you can begin to ask yourself.
Yes.
Is it the speaker placement or is it the EQ? And then maybe that will help you know who to call or what questions to ask when you call somebody like Ben, because you've done a little bit of research, and
Hmm.
that will help to guide the discussion. And it helps to have those details and feel like you're empowered with these things and not just shooting in the dark. Like, I don't know, it
Right.
just sounds bad.
Well,
So,
and that's I want to give people just a little peace of mind here too, to say that's okay too.
yeah.
You know, first of all, Rome was built one brick at a time, not in a
Hmm.
day. And today, after 30 minutes, you now know maybe more than you didn't. And another 30 minutes, you'll know more than you did before. And, you know, that's how a process goes. And we've
Yeah.
talked about, you know, our learning experiences as individuals. But I think it's really good to have a sense of what you're trying to address. But it's also good to hopefully you have a relationship with a contractor that you trust,
Yeah.
you know, and then you can be a little bit vulnerable, because the reality is, if you are trying to make yourself appear to know more than you really do, we'll see through that pretty fast. You
Yeah.
know, we've been doing this a long time, and we, you know, so sometimes we just kind of politely nod, you know, and they're like, "Oh, I think it's the flux capacitor." We're like, "Yeah, it could be," or it's probably not, but you know, it could be, you
Or
know.
not. Yeah.
So, you know,
Yes.
uh, anyway, but I think it's, you know, as a friend of mine who's a jeweler says, and I don't know how your husband feels about this, but I think you'll get a laugh out of it. I
Yeah.
have no idea. I am completely clueless when it comes to jewelry. I couldn't tell the difference between gold and brass and diamonds and glass. So, you know, I think the moral of the story is, if you don't know what you're buying, you should know who you're buying it from,
Yeah.
and then you can hopefully trust that they'll get you in a good place. And yeah, so, but it is fun. I think it's good to know these things, and it's good to be able to address these things. And maybe it isn't something you need to call somebody in for. Maybe it is something you could take a stab at a little bit. And in today's world with digital mixing boards, really nice that you can save a preset and say, here's my get out of jail, here's where it was, you
Yes.
know, mess with a bunch of stuff. And by the way, I said this at your conference. My favorite button on an EQ is bypass.
Hmm.
You know, which basically turns the EQ off. Turn the EQ off. Did I make it better or maybe make it worse?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you just start digging a hole, and you dig it so deep. And you know, just yesterday, I know we got to wrap this up. I'm sorry, but just yesterday, I saw a post on a forum, and a guy was asking for help on his kick drum, and I didn't even type a reply because there was already like 100 comments on the thread. But as soon as I looked at the EQ, I thought, well, I would just start over. You know,
Hmm.
there's
Yeah.
no coming back from where you're at. Just, you've scooped out everything. Just,
Yeah.
that's a big problem. Just start over. You're missing whatever it is. But you know, point
Yeah.
is that bypass button, and you go, oh, yes, it is better. Oh, no, no,
Hmm.
it's not. Okay, start over. That's okay. That's how
Hmm.
learning goes.
Yeah, for sure. That's amazing. I love that. Well, that is such a great wrap up to the conversation today. Thank you all for joining. This has been just really fun to see people starting to, join in and interact and all of that. And Ben Stowe, fan club president.
Drew is one of the, you know, truly, I love some of the nicest people you've ever meet here. And I'm so excited. By the way, I want to say, Lance, Howie, Drew, you know, you guys, I know you from a different context outside of worship. I just think it's great that you're in this, that you're
I love
participating in
it.
this. It's so cool that, you know, those of us who do sound professionally, you know, also have this opportunity to do that, you know, in our churches, and to help, you know, even if you're not the person standing at the board, because I'm not the guy that stands at the board at my church, but I'm
Hmm.
available for that guy to talk to, right?
Yeah.
You know, we
That's
can just lend our experience and helping improve that for everybody.
Yeah, that's so great. That's what it's about. We're better together and we can help one another. And I love that. So, for all of you, thank you for joining in. And we will be back in 2 weeks because next week is Thanksgiving. So, we're going to take next week off. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I know, Thanksgiving. And we'll keep you guys posted on a topic for next time. You'll have to, hop into that Facebook group and join in so you can see what topics we choose to talk about. And we hope that you all have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching.